So for more on this, Taha Arvas joins me now in the studio. He's a financial columnist with the daily Sabah newspaper. Taha, thank you so much for being with us once again on Money Talks. Now, the GDP figures, 2.9%, beating most analysts' expectations. Was it beyond your expectations too?
I think people were expecting a surprise. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be a surprise if they were expecting it, but I think the magnitude was a lot higher than many expected. And I think that's because there's been a lot of fiscal stimulus. The government has been pulling out all the stops in pushing the economy forward because there appears to be a global slowdown coming around the corner, so they wanted to get ahead of the curve.
Indeed, it does look like it. But just focusing on the Turkish economy itself, do you think that the Turkish economy is where it should be right now from a structural point of view?
I think there are some liberalization steps that the government has been planning to take. The attempted coup last summer kind of slowed everything down, rather. And so the government's kind of playing a little catch-up. And so I think as soon as this upcoming election referendum is held, probably they'll speed up liberalization policies.
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit of a question mark, I suppose, that investors just want to get out of the way, isn't it?
That's true. In the last 2 years, there have been 4 elections, so the people and investors are trying to get over any other uncertainty. And this referendum obviously this upcoming referendum has a little bit of uncertainty to it, so they want to clear the air, and whatever happens, they just want to proceed.
Just going back to the domestic economy, one of the things that stood out was, apart from government spending, there was a lot of consumer spending as well. Consumer sentiment seems to be holding up despite all of these things that you're talking about.
Right, absolutely. I think that's the most surprising part of this. But I think it was one of the positive parts was after the coup, it seemed like the parties came together. They were united. And so that unification of parties that have been historically in opposition to each other helped consumer confidence, and it helped consumers believe that the future was brighter for Turkey, and that pushed the numbers up.
When you look globally, you mentioned the headwinds. Specifically, what are the greatest dangers for Turkey's economy?
Well, Turkey's largest trading partner is Europe, as you know. So the question mark as to the future of the European Union is a huge one. So much of exports are done in euro currencies. So it's important to resolve any questions about the future of the European Union so for Turkey to get back to business.
Great, Taha Arvas, don't go away. We're going to be back with you in a moment. We thought it would be a nice idea to take a look back at the top business stories of the last 7 days, and what a tumultuous week it's been. To help us pick through it all, I'm joined by my fellow money talkers, TRT World's editor-at-large Craig Copetas in Paris, and senior business producer Andre-Pierre du Plessis we spoke about just now. We've also had tourism numbers out this week, and once again the headline figure was disappointing. A 6.5% drop in February compared to the same month last year, but there was a silver lining. The Russians are back. Arrivals from there almost doubled last month. But when we take a longer-term view, it is clear to see the damage that last year's coup and terror attacks have had on this important sector. Tourism accounts for 13% of Turkey's GDP and employs 8% of the workforce. So, Taha, let's turn now to these tourism numbers.
Okay.
Again, were these a surprise?
I think these were not a surprise as much as the GDP numbers were, frankly. The one silver lining was the spike with the Russian arrivals. They increased by 95% year over year. So February of 2016 versus 2017. So that was great news. But the rest of the numbers, there's no way to sugarcoat it, frankly. There's just a real slowdown. And it makes sense because people are wary of the future of the government, of the country, rather. And especially with what happened last summer, I think people will get over it, but it'll take time.
Yeah, indeed. Political factors, of course, very important in this particular sector.
Right.
As we go into this peak summer season for tourism, how do you think this season is going to do compared to last year?
I think last year was almost was the perfect storm for tourism. So it's going to definitely do better than last year. But how much better it will be is a question mark, and it depends on how the people and the government can put an end to any tensions between Europe and Turkey, and Turkey and Russia rather have been pretty much patching things up. So I don't think there should be a problem in that respect.
It is interesting. I mean, like, you know, some of the traders and everything that we've spoken to in, you know, the Grand Bazaar and places like that, they've just basically written last year off, and they're looking forward to this year. We know that the Turkish government is taking steps to revive the tourism industry. They have this Bring Your Neighbor campaign, which is a very innovative way of trying to boost numbers. But again, though, we have had this row with Germany and with Netherlands. How's that going to play into all of this?
You know, I think people will understand that there are elections in France, there's elections in Germany this year, and there were just elections in the Netherlands. So a lot of this is politics, frankly. And I think as soon as those elections come up and are dealt with, then you know, everyone wants to have a great time, and you know, everyone wants to go to the beach and hang out. So I think they'll come around, and I think there will be a return, especially at the lowest at the value of the Turkish lira. I think we'll have a lot of tourists return this summer. And
what lovely beaches we have.
That's right.
Let me turn to Craig in Paris. Craig, thanks so much for being with us. Now, France, of course, suffered 2 major terrorist attacks in Paris and in Nice. And we did see tourism numbers taking a hit in France as well. But things have recovered to at least some extent. What lessons, if any, can Turkey learn from how France dealt with that impact?
Aggressive enforcement, preventive maintenance, an aggressive marketing campaign, which is what the French did. But make no mistake about it, the tourist numbers down here in France are still quite low. You can find hotels here at great rates. The situation down in the south on the beaches is not that good. And the fear that everyone here has is that if there is one more, then this whole cycle will start over again. One of the things we've seen is an increased presence of armed troops on the streets. And this is something that, you know, you come to Paris, people don't like to see it, but it's the way of life now.
Indeed, it is a necessary evil. The big elephant in the room now, though, of course, is Brexit. British Prime Minister Theresa May has told the EU that the UK wants to leave, and the 2-year countdown for the most complicated divorce in history is underway. And now the ball is in the EU's court. The European Council President Donald Tusk said the UK will not be able to immediately launch into bilateral trade talks with EU member states. He said other issues, including an estimated $62 billion divorce bill to be paid by the UK, would have to be discussed as well. Tusk also stressed that the UK will remain under the jurisdiction of the European Court and that it may also have to accept the freedom of movement of people. But Tusk assured the UK that it would not be punished and that Brexit is punishment enough. Craig, let me stay with you now on this. So Brexit moves into the European Forum. In addition to what Donald Tusk said over this week, I was actually quite interested in how he said it. I mean, on Wednesday, we heard him say he already misses the UK. And in the press conference that we had on Friday, he seemed defensive. What should we read into all of this?
I have absolutely no idea, Azar. None whatsoever. Because what we've gone into now, we're down the road of rhetoric and soothsaying. And I prefer, going forward, to look at realities here. The old journalistic maxim, don't tell me what you think, tell me what you see. And what we see here right now is the UK is the official poster country for EU incompetence, whether you want to accept the incompetence or not. If you want to see what the results of EU incompetence are, because they do exist, go to the EU theme park, Greece, where you can fully experience the fecklessness of of what's happened down there to the Greeks. Let me go through this, because this is critical. 25% of all funds gutted from hospitals, 50% cuts in spending on drugs, a doubling in cases of major depression, and a 33% rise in suicides. The number of stillborn babies up 21%. 4 in 10 Greek children have now been shoved into poverty. And some surveys actually estimate, Azar, that 54%, that's more than half of the Greek population, are now undernourished. That is what the EU has created.
AP, I know you want to jump in here for a second.
To ask Craig a question further to this, as an Greek American, so the way that the American media has portrayed the Brexit story across the pond this week is that this feels what some people are calling the CALEX, California trying to exit from all the other United States of America. Now, of course, if you speak to someone like Farage, he would be very happy to hear that. What do you think? Is Brexit really just a foreboding of what we're going to see across the world as people, even in South Africa, stop believing in globalization?
Yeah, great question.
No, you're never going to see states seceding in the Union, despite what EU President Jean-Claude Juncker said yesterday. You know, the man from Luxembourg, the country that made tax havens chic and fashionable, said that if Donald Trump doesn't become more supportive of the EU, he's going to push for Ohio and Texas to leave the United States. This man is oblivious, and it points directly to why Brexit happened. There is just a disconnection between the island and the continent on all sorts of policies.
Yeah. Let's have this conversation again in 2 years when we know whether Scotland is going to remain in the United Kingdom.
Never.
AP, I'm glad you brought up the issue of Nigel Farage, because this was one of the strangest stories I saw this week. Nigel Farage said this week that if Brexit is a disaster, and I'm quoting him, he says he will go and live abroad. I'm wondering where he may possibly go. Is it going to be France? Is it going to be Turkey?
Donald Trump.
US?
Donald Trump will welcome him with open arms. Yeah,
right?
He's a big fan, right?
Indeed. Oh, my goodness me. What
fascinating
times we're in. So that was the week that was. Let's go around again very quickly and find out what's on everyone's radar for next week. Taha, let me start with you.
Well, there's several very important things happening next week. The Egyptian president will be in Washington on Monday, and then on Thursday, the Chinese premier, Xi Jinping, will be meeting with Donald Trump. Trump made China one of his biggest selling points in the election and said over and over that we don't win again, we haven't won in a while, and the Chinese currency manipulation will have to come to an end. So after they have their meeting, at their press conference, let's see if he will walk the walk and really come back to Xi Jinping and let the people know that they're really fighting China on this currency
Indeed,
thing.
We're going to be keeping a very close eye on that. Craig, what's happening in Europe? A busy week ahead over there.
Well, yeah, everything in my patch of TRT world has to do with the upcoming French elections. And what we're focusing on is the communist candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who has overtaken the socialist candidate, Benoît Hamon, in the polls and is now stalking François Fillon. On top of that, recent polls that we can trust say that 47% of the voters don't know yet who they're going to vote for. So we're going to be looking at Mélenchon, whose two major economic policies are: one, minimum 1,300 euros a month wage for all workers, and if you make more than 33,000 euros a month, he's going to tax you at 100%. Now, try to figure that out with a calculator, but that's what he's saying.
My goodness, haven't we seen all this before? And AP, what's on your radar for next week?
Well, on Wednesday, the very last Asterix comic book is going to be published, or announced at least, after 400 million copies. And I know Craig is a big fan of Asterix. I grew up with it.
Huge.
And it will be an interesting gauge to see how successful and how healthy the market for comic books still is.
Oh, fantastic. I cannot wait. That's going to be my favourite story for next week. Taha Arvas from the Daily Sabah, Craig Copetas in Paris, and Andre-Pierre du Plessis in Istanbul. That's all from Money Talks for now. From me, Azhar Sukri, and the whole team here in Istanbul, thank you for watching.